The small town always had a quiet charm. People here knew each other by name, and the sound of laughter often echoed through the streets during local events. In this town lived a woman who kept to herself most of the time. She was gentle, soft-spoken, and always preferred to stay in the background rather than be in the spotlight. Many people saw her almost every day, walking to the local store or sitting on the park bench with a book in her hand, but very few truly knew her. She liked it that way. She liked the peace of being unnoticed. She lived in a small house at the end of a quiet street. It wasn't big or fancy, but it was warm and full of little things that mattered to her. The living room had a large window where sunlight streamed in every morning, making the place feel alive. Against one wall stood an old piano. It was polished but clearly aged, with keys that held stories of the past. This piano had belonged to her grandmother, who had loved music more than anything in the world. The woman had learned to play on this very instrument as a child, but only in the safety of her home where no one could watch her. She had a small circle of friends, but one in particular was very close to her. That friend was cheerful and always loved joining local events. So when the community center announced the upcoming charity talent night, that friend immediately signed up and started convincing everyone else to join too. People were excited. They planned dances, songs, small plays, and even some funny acts. But when her friend turned to her and said, "You should play the piano," her heart skipped a beat. Her smile faded before it could even form. She shook her head instantly. "No, I can't," she whispered. Her friend tilted her head. "Why not? You're so good. I've heard you play." "That's different," she replied softly. "That's just at home. I can't do it in front of people." Her friend laughed, not in a mean way, but in a way that made it sound easy. "Of course you can. Everyone here knows you. It's not like a big city stage. It'll be fun." But the woman didn't feel it would be fun at all. The idea of standing in front of a crowd made her chest tighten. She had once tried to play on stage many years ago, when she was much younger. Back then, her grandmother had signed her up for a recital. She remembered the lights, the people, the hush of the audience waiting, and then she remembered how her fingers had frozen, how the music had disappeared from her mind, and how the room had felt too small and too loud all at once. That night had left a mark on her heart. She never wanted to feel that again, so she told her friend no, again and again. But her friend had a playful streak and a habit of not giving up easily. "You'll be amazing. I'll help you. We'll practice. You don't even have to say anything, just play. That's all," she kept insisting. The woman smiled nervously but didn't agree. She hoped the conversation would end there. But life has its way of surprising people, sometimes gently and sometimes with a jolt. The next day, when she walked by the community center to drop off some books, she noticed a big poster on the wall. Her eyes scanned the list of performers, singers, dancers, a few local kids doing magic tricks. And then, right near the bottom, her name was there. Her heart jumped. She blinked twice, thinking maybe she saw wrong. But it was still there, clear as day. Her friend had signed her up. She stood frozen for a moment, staring at the poster, feeling her heartbeat in her ears. She wanted to erase her name. She wanted to march inside and say there had been a mistake. But instead she just stood there with a mix of shock and disbelief. A group of people walked by, talking about how exciting the event was going to be. She overheard someone say, "I can't wait to hear her play. She's always been so quiet. This will be a surprise." The woman's stomach tightened. She hadn't agreed to this. She hadn't planned any of this. The event was just 2 weeks away. 2 weeks might seem like a lot of time to some, but to her, it felt like the countdown to a storm she couldn't stop. That night, she sat alone in her living room, staring at the piano. The keys seemed to stare back at her. She ran her fingers over them lightly, feeling their cool touch. A soft melody drifted into the room as she began to play without thinking. This was her comfort, the place where everything else disappeared. But even as the familiar tune filled the air, her mind kept going back to the poster. What would happen when she sat in front of everyone? What if she froze again like last time? What if they stared? What if they laughed? She could already feel the weight of their eyes on her. Fear has a way of growing bigger in silence. The next morning, she tried to convince herself that maybe it wouldn't be so bad. Maybe she could talk to her friend and have her name removed. So she went to find her friend. When she explained, her friend simply smiled and said, "Trust me, this will be good for you. You've hidden your gift for too long." She wanted to argue, but there was something warm and sincere in her friend's voice. She didn't want to disappoint her either. Still, deep down, fear sat like a heavy stone in her chest. In the following days, she tried to avoid talking about the event. But everywhere she went, someone mentioned it. At the grocery store, an older man said, "I heard you're playing at the talent night. That's wonderful." At the bakery, the woman behind the counter smiled and said, "We'll be cheering for you." She forced a small smile each time, but inside, she felt trapped. It wasn't that she didn't love music. She did. It was that sharing it with the world scared her more than anything. At night, when the town was quiet and the only sound was the soft ticking of the clock, she would sit at the piano again. Her hands moved gently over the keys, playing melodies she had learned as a child. Each note carried a memory of her grandmother, the warm smile, the gentle guidance, the way she used to say, "Play from your heart, not from fear." Those words echoed in her mind now, as if they were trying to reach her through time. But her fear wasn't something that could disappear with kind words. It had roots that went deep. Every time she imagined standing on that stage, her heart would race. She thought about backing out. She thought about pretending to be sick. She even thought about leaving town just for that night. But then she imagined the disappointment in her friend's eyes, and something inside her hesitated. She began to practice, not with excitement, but with a quiet kind of determination. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't even tell her friend. When the house was silent, she'd sit down and play again and again, trying to steady her hands, trying to remember the feeling of music without fear. Still, the fear remained. As the days passed, the posters around town grew brighter and bigger. The buzz in the air grew louder. People were excited. She, on the other hand, felt the world slowly closing in. One evening, she stood by her window, watching children run down the street laughing. She wished she could feel that lightness. She wished this didn't feel like such a mountain. But deep inside, a quiet voice began to whisper, a voice she hadn't listened to in years. It said, "What if this time is different?" She didn't know if it was hope or just a small spark of courage, but it was there. She walked to the piano, sat down, and placed her hands gently on the keys. The soft sound filled the room again, and though fear still sat inside her for the first time in a long time, she let herself imagine playing in front of others, not as a frightened woman, but as someone who could share something beautiful. She wasn't ready yet. But maybe, just maybe, she could be. The days leading up to the performance seemed to move both fast and slow at the same time. Each morning she woke up hoping it had all been a dream, but then she would see the flyer on her table with the big words, "Charity Talent Night," printed on it. Her name was still there near the bottom of the list. It felt like those black letters were staring at her, reminding her that she couldn't escape now. Every time she thought about it, her stomach tightened. She tried to distract herself by keeping busy, cleaning the house, organizing books, watering the plants, anything that would keep her mind off the stage. But no matter what she did, the thought would creep back in. She had never liked being the center of attention. Even small gatherings made her nervous. The idea of sitting in front of the whole town while everyone watched her fingers move across the keys felt unbearable. Still, she practiced. She didn't tell anyone about it, but every evening she sat down at the old piano and played. Sometimes it was for hours, sometimes only a few minutes before her nerves took over. She tried different songs, searching for one that felt right, something that spoke to her heart. The sound of the piano filled the small house, soft and beautiful, but there was always a tremor in her hands, a reminder of her fear. One afternoon, her friend stopped by unannounced, as she often did. She came in cheerfully, carrying a basket of muffins from the bakery. "You've been hiding," her friend teased gently. "I thought I'd check if you're still alive." She laughed quietly and said she was fine, but her friend saw the worry in her eyes. "You're nervous about the performance, aren't you?" she asked. She nodded. "I don't think I can do it. I keep thinking about what could go wrong." Her friend sat beside her. "You've been given a gift. You don't have to be perfect. Just share it. People aren't coming to judge you. They're coming to listen, to feel something." The woman looked down at her hands. "But what if I freeze again? What if I mess up?" Her friend smiled softly. "Then you start again. No one will care. They'll still see the courage it took for you to even walk up there." Those words stayed with her long after her friend left. Courage. It wasn't something she thought she had. But maybe courage wasn't about being fearless. Maybe it was about doing something even when you were scared. As the event got closer, the whole town began to buzz with excitement. The small community center, which usually hosted bingo nights and art classes, was being decorated with string lights and colorful banners. Volunteers came together to set up chairs and test the microphones. She passed by a few times on her way to the store and watched from a distance. The sound of laughter and chatter made her heart race. Everyone seemed to be looking forward to the show. She wished she could feel the same. That evening, she sat by the piano again. The familiar creak of the bench felt comforting. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, and for a moment she imagined the faces in the crowd, the lights, the silence before the first note. It scared her, but there was also something thrilling about it. The idea that maybe she could show people a side of herself they had never seen. She began to play one of her grandmother's favorite pieces. The notes flowed softly at first, then stronger, clearer. It was a song she had played 100 times before, one that felt like home. As she played, she thought of her grandmother's voice saying, "Music isn't about the notes. It's about the feeling." She closed her eyes and let her emotions guide her. By the time the song ended, tears had filled her eyes. She wiped them quickly, half embarrassed even though no one was watching. For the first time in weeks, she felt something shift inside her, a small spark of belief that maybe she could actually do it. Over the next few days, she practiced more seriously. She chose that same song, the one that reminded her of her grandmother. It wasn't too complicated, but it carried meaning. It was full of emotion, the kind that could touch hearts even without words. Every night as she played, her fear didn't disappear, but it began to soften around the edges. One evening as she was practicing, there was a light knock on her door. It was one of her neighbors, an older woman who lived a few houses down. She smiled kindly and said, "I was walking past and heard your piano. It's beautiful." "You play with such feeling." The woman blushed slightly. "Thank you. I was just practicing." "I hope you play that at the charity night," the neighbor said. "It'll move everyone's heart." Her throat tightened. She just nodded politely. But after the neighbor left, her hands trembled a little. People were already expecting something special. She didn't want to disappoint them. The night before the event, she could hardly sleep. She tossed and turned, her mind replaying every possible scenario, missing a note, forgetting the melody, walking off stage halfway through. The more she thought about it, the more nervous she became. At one point, she got up and went to the piano, hoping playing would calm her. The house was quiet, the only sound being the soft creak of the floorboards under her feet. She sat down and played again, slowly, carefully, until her heart began to settle. When she finished, she took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "You can do this." Just once. The morning of the performance arrived faster than she expected. The sun was bright and the air felt crisp. She tried to go through her day as normally as possible, making tea, reading the paper, watering her plants. But everything felt different. Her hands shook even when she wasn't near the piano. Around noon, her friend stopped by again, her energy filling the room like sunshine. "It's the big day," her friend said, smiling widely. "How are you feeling?" The woman gave a nervous laugh. "Like I might faint." Her friend chuckled. "You'll be fine. Just remember, this isn't about showing off. It's about sharing something you love." The words helped, even if just a little. That evening, as she got ready, she chose a simple dress. Nothing too fancy, just something that made her feel comfortable. She tied her hair back neatly and looked at herself in the mirror. For a long moment, she didn't recognize the woman staring back. There was fear, yes, but also something else. A quiet determination. As she walked toward the community center, she could hear the sound of music and laughter from outside. The place was alive with energy. Children were running around. People were greeting each other, and the smell of baked goods filled the air. It all felt warm and welcoming, but her heart was still pounding. Her friend spotted her and waved excitedly. "You're here. Don't worry, you'll go near the end. Just relax and enjoy the show until then." She nodded, though relaxing was the last thing she felt capable of. She found a quiet corner near the back and sat down. The performances began. Singers, dancers, a small group of kids performing a funny skit. The audience laughed, clapped, and cheered for everyone. Watching them, she started to realize that no one here was perfect. Everyone was just having fun, sharing a little piece of themselves. As her turn got closer, her heartbeat quickened. Her friend squeezed her hand and whispered, "You've got this." She tried to smile, but her throat was dry. When the person before her finished, there was a round of applause. Then she heard her name called. The sound of it made her knees weak. She took a deep breath, stood up slowly, and walked toward the stage. The lights were bright, almost blinding. For a moment she wanted to turn back, but then she remembered her grandmother's words. Play from your heart, not from fear. She sat down at the piano bench. The crowd was quiet now, waiting. She could hear her own breathing, fast and uneven. Her fingers hovered above the keys, trembling slightly. Then, without thinking too much, she pressed the first note. It was soft, almost hesitant, but it was enough. The familiar sound filled the room, and slowly her hands began to move on their own. Each note seemed to calm her heartbeat just a little more. The music flowed, gentle and full of emotion. She closed her eyes for a second, letting the sound wrap around her like a warm blanket. By the time she reached the end of the song, she could feel the tension leave her body. The last note lingered in the air for a moment before fading into silence. She looked up. The room was still. And then all at once the audience began to clap. Some even stood up. The sound was overwhelming, but this time it wasn't frightening. It was beautiful. For the first time in a long while she smiled. A real, heartfelt smile. She had done it. And somewhere deep inside she knew this was only the beginning of something new. The moment she stepped off the stage, her legs felt weak. Her heart was still racing, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from something else. Relief. Joy. A kind of disbelief that she had actually done it. People were still clapping as she walked back toward her seat. Her friend rushed over and wrapped her in a tight hug. "You were incredible," she whispered, her eyes shining with pride. The woman could barely speak. Her throat felt tight and her hands were trembling, not from nerves now, but from emotion. "I did it," she murmured softly, almost to herself. It didn't feel real yet. For years she had avoided moments like this. For years she had told herself she couldn't do it. But tonight something had changed. As the rest of the performances continued, she sat quietly, listening, smiling when others performed, clapping along with everyone else. But her mind was still halfway between the stage and the memory of the piano under her fingertips. The notes still echoed in her head. The sound, the lights, the silence before the applause, it all played back in flashes. She had expected to panic, to freeze, but instead she had felt something she hadn't in a long time. Peace. After the show ended, people began to gather around her. They smiled, congratulated her, told her how beautiful her performance had been. Some said her playing brought tears to their eyes. She wasn't used to so much attention. She blushed and thanked them quietly, unsure how to respond to all the praise. Her friend stood by her side, grinning from ear to ear. "See," she said. "I told you everyone would love it." The woman laughed softly. "I still can't believe it happened." "You didn't just play," her friend said. "You made everyone feel something. That's rare." Later that night, when she returned home, the house felt strangely different. The same piano sat where it always had, but now it seemed to glow softly in the dim light. She ran her hand over the wooden edge, feeling the smooth surface under her fingers. It was the same instrument she had played 1,000 times before, but tonight it had opened a door she thought was closed forever. She made herself a cup of tea and sat near the window. Outside, the streets were quiet. The sound of crickets filled the night air. She replayed the moment in her head again and again, each time smiling a little wider. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. It wasn't fame or attention she cared about. It was the feeling of connection. For a few minutes on that stage, she had shared a piece of her heart with others, and they had listened. The next morning, she woke up to a small surprise. Someone had left a note in her mailbox. It was written on simple paper, folded neatly. She opened it and read, "Your music was beautiful. Thank you for playing. It reminded me of my mother's favorite song." There was no name at the bottom, just those few words. She smiled as she read it again. It wasn't much, but it meant the world. As the days passed, people in town kept mentioning her performance. At the market, at the bakery, even at the post office, someone would stop her to say something kind. "That song you played, it touched my heart," one person said. Another told her, "I didn't know you could play like that." Each time she felt a mix of embarrassment and pride. She wasn't used to being noticed, but now the attention didn't feel so frightening. It felt warm. Her friend, of course, couldn't stop talking about it. "You should play more often," she insisted. "Maybe at the next event or even at the cafe downtown." "People would love to hear you." The woman shook her head quickly. "Oh no, once was enough." Her friend laughed. "That's what you said about performing the first time. Look how that turned out." She smiled but didn't answer. Deep down, she wasn't sure. She loved playing, but performing still scared her a little. Yet there was also a tiny part of her, a quiet, growing part, that wondered what it would be like to play again, not out of pressure but out of choice. One evening, as she was sitting at the piano, she found herself playing the same song from the talent night. The melody filled the room once again, but now it sounded different, freer, brighter. When she finished, she didn't stop. She played another song, then another. Hours passed without her realizing. It was as if something inside her had been unlocked. Not long after, the community center called her. They were planning another small event, a local art fair, and asked if she would consider performing again. Just a short piece, nothing big. She hesitated. Her first instinct was to say no, but then she remembered the way she had felt that night, the connection, the joy. Maybe she could do it again. So after a long pause, she said yes. The following week, she began practicing again. It felt different this time. Less about fear, more about expression. Each day she played a little longer, experimenting with songs, rediscovering the feeling of freedom that music brought her. People walking by her house could sometimes hear the piano drifting through the open window, and they'd smile, recognizing the tune. Her friend visited often, always with encouragement. "You're glowing lately," she said one afternoon. "It's like you found yourself again." The woman laughed. "Maybe I did, or maybe I just stopped hiding." When the day of the art fair arrived, she wasn't as nervous as before. There were still butterflies in her stomach, but this time they felt different, like excitement, not dread. The event was smaller, more relaxed, with people walking around, chatting, and enjoying local crafts. When it was her turn to play, she walked to the piano with steady steps. She took a deep breath and began. The music flowed easily now. Each note came from the heart, carrying a piece of her story. She didn't think about the crowd or the lights. She just played. And when she finished, the applause was warm, full of kindness. She smiled, bowed slightly, and felt a quiet pride settle inside her. After the fair, the town's music teacher approached her. He was an older man with kind eyes. "You have a gift," he told her. "Have you ever thought of teaching?" She blinked, surprised. "Teaching?" "Yes," he said with a nod. "There are so many children who want to learn, but they need someone patient, someone who plays with heart, not just skill." She thought about it for a moment. The idea seemed strange at first, but the more she considered it, the more it made sense. Music had always been a part of her life, even when she had tried to hide it. Maybe now it could be a part of someone else's too. Over the next few weeks, she began giving a few lessons to children in the neighborhood. At first, it was just one or two, but soon more parents began asking if she had space for their kids. Her small living room filled with laughter and the sound of clumsy fingers learning new notes. She found herself smiling more often, feeling lighter than she had in years. One evening, after her last student left, she sat at the piano alone again. The sunset light poured through the window, painting the room in shades of gold and pink. She placed her hands on the keys and played softly. The same song that had once scared her now felt like an old friend. She thought back to that first night, how terrified she had been, how much she had wanted to run away. Now that memory felt distant, like a story from another life. The fear hadn't disappeared completely, but it no longer controlled her. It had become something smaller, something she could live with. Her friend came by later and found her smiling at the piano. "You look happy," she said. "I am," she replied simply. "For the first time, I think I'm really happy." Her friend nodded, sitting down beside her. "See what happens when you let people see who you really are?" The woman smiled and began to play again, the notes flowing smoothly under her fingers. The room filled with music, soft and warm. She wasn't playing for a crowd or applause this time. She was playing for herself, for the people who believed in her, and for the memory of her grandmother, who had always known she had this gift. As the final note faded into the quiet evening air, she looked out the window at the calm streets of her little town. The same town where she had once hidden from the world now felt like a place where she belonged.
She had learned something precious, and that sometimes the thing we fear the most is the very thing that sets us free.
The sound of the piano had become part of her daily life again. Every morning when the sun poured into the room through the window, she would sit down and play something light, something that made her heart feel at peace. It wasn't just about music anymore, it was about expression, connection, and freedom. She no longer played out of fear or because someone pushed her to. She played because it made her feel alive. Teaching had changed her too. The first few weeks she had been nervous about it. She wasn't sure if she was patient enough or skilled enough to guide others. But the children she taught weren't there to judge. They came with bright eyes and curious hearts, eager to learn, to press each key and make sound come to life. Their laughter filled her home, and the awkward, clumsy notes they played didn't bother her at all. In fact, they reminded her of her younger self. The same shy hands, the same hope that maybe one day she could make real music. She would sometimes watch her students closely, noticing how their faces lit up when they finally got something right. That small joy warmed her every time. She saw how music gave them confidence, the same way it had once given her courage when she needed it most. With every lesson, she realized that teaching was not just about technique. It was about sharing a piece of her heart. And in return she received something she never expected: fulfillment. Word about her classes spread quietly around town. Parents would stop by asking if she had space for one more student. Soon her small living room was full almost every afternoon. Sometimes the children brought flowers or little thank you notes. Sometimes they simply smiled and said, "I love learning from you." Each time she felt that familiar warmth in her chest. She had once feared being seen, but now she found joy in being part of something bigger than herself. One Saturday morning, she was sitting by the piano, listening to one of her students play a simple tune. Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees and the sun made gentle patterns on the wooden floor. The student looked nervous, missing a few notes here and there. When the song ended, the child frowned. "I messed up," they said sadly. She smiled. "No, you didn't. You played with feeling, and that's what matters. Music isn't about being perfect. It's about sharing a piece of yourself." The child nodded slowly, then smiled again. "Can I try one more time?" "Of course," she said softly. As the lesson went on, she found herself thinking about those same words, sharing a piece of yourself. Maybe that was what her grandmother had meant all those years ago. Maybe music was never about being flawless, but about honesty, emotion, and courage. One evening, her friend visited again, bringing over a small box of pastries from the bakery. They sat together with tea, talking about little things: the weather, the new park benches, the children's school fair. Then her friend mentioned something that made her heart skip. "You know, the community center is hosting another charity event next month. They're looking for performers again." The woman smiled nervously. "You're not signing me up again, are you?" she asked half-jokingly. Her friend laughed. "No, not this time. But they did ask me to tell you that if you'd like to perform again, they'd be honored to have you." "No pressure, though." She didn't answer right away. The idea brought back memories of that first night. The lights, the nerves, the applause. It had been terrifying and wonderful all at once. "I'll think about it," she said finally. Her friend nodded with a knowing smile. "You don't have to decide now, but I think you should. You have something special and people need to hear it." After her friend left, she sat by the piano for a long time, lost in thought. Her hands rested on the keys, but she didn't play. She just sat there listening to the silence. She didn't feel the same fear she used to. It was different now, quieter, gentler. Maybe she could do it again, but this time for herself, not because anyone made her. That night she dreamed of her grandmother. She was sitting at the old piano, smiling softly, her fingers gliding across the keys. "Play," her grandmother said in that calm, loving voice. "Don't think. Just play." When she woke up, her heart felt light. The morning air was crisp, the kind that made everything seem new again. She walked to the piano, sat down, and began to play. The melody came out naturally, like breathing. By the time she finished, she had made her decision. She would perform again. The weeks that followed were filled with gentle excitement. This time she didn't hide her practice. Her students knew she was preparing for the event, and they often asked what song she would play. "You'll see," she would say with a smile. The children seemed even more excited than she was. Some of them promised to be there, cheering her on. As the day approached, she felt a calmness that surprised her. Of course, there were still small moments of nervousness, a racing heart here, a shaky hand there, but they didn't control her anymore. She had learned to breathe through it, to focus on the music instead of the fear. The night of the event arrived. The community center was beautifully decorated again, this time with soft lights and delicate flowers. The crowd was larger than before, filled with familiar faces, her students, their parents, neighbors, and friends. When she saw them smiling and waving at her, a warmth spread through her chest. It didn't feel like pressure anymore. It felt like home. When it was her turn to perform, she walked up to the piano with steady steps. The lights were bright but not blinding. The audience fell silent. She sat down, took a deep breath, and let her fingers find their place on the keys. Then she began. The song she played wasn't complicated or grand. It was simple but full of emotion, a piece that spoke of growth, of courage, of finding one's place again after being lost. Each note carried a memory. Each chord told a story. She didn't think about perfection. She just let her heart guide her. As the melody filled the room, she saw a few people close their eyes, others holding hands. Some smiled softly. The connection was there again. That invisible thread between her and the audience. It was the same feeling she had felt the first time, but stronger now. Deeper. She wasn't the same person she had been then. She had changed, healed, and rediscovered herself. When the last note faded, there was a long moment of silence before the applause began. It was louder than before, full of warmth and admiration. Her students jumped up and cheered, their little hands clapping wildly. Her friend was standing near the back, wiping away a tear and smiling proudly. She stood up, bowed her head slightly, and smiled. This time she didn't feel overwhelmed. She felt grateful. Every bit of fear she had carried for years seemed to melt away under that applause. Afterward, people came up to her again, just like the last time, telling her how moved they were by her music. One older man said, "You made me remember what it's like to feel young again." Another woman whispered, "That was beautiful." "Thank you." Her students gathered around her, their faces glowing. "You were amazing," one of them said. "You played like magic." She laughed and hugged them gently. "Thank you," she said. "But remember, it's not magic, it's love." That night, when she returned home, she placed a small bouquet of flowers, gifts from her students, on top of the piano. She sat down, her fingers brushing the keys lightly. The room was quiet, but it wasn't an empty quiet. It was full of peace, of fulfillment. She began to play again, softly, letting the sound flow through the house. As she played, she realized something. The fear that had once held her back had never really gone away. It had simply transformed. It had become part of her story, part of her music. It reminded her of where she had started and how far she had come. And that was beautiful in its own way. When she finished playing, she looked at the piano and smiled. This instrument had been her refuge, her teacher, her bridge to the world. Through it, she had found her courage, her purpose, and her joy. She whispered softly, almost like a prayer. "Thank you." Outside, the night was still and calm. The stars shimmered above the town, the same town that had once made her nervous to perform, now filled with people who believed in her. She sat there for a long time, her heart full and her soul quiet. For the first time in her life, she felt truly free. The days after the performance passed like a calm breeze. She didn't expect the attention that followed. People she barely knew greeted her warmly in the market, stopping her to say how much they enjoyed her music. Even strangers seemed to smile when they saw her, as if they shared a secret understanding. It was a small town and word traveled fast. She wasn't used to being noticed, but this time it didn't make her uncomfortable. It felt different, gentle, genuine. One morning she walked into the bakery and the owner grinned at her. "You were wonderful the other night," he said while wrapping up her bread. "That song, it stayed with me all weekend." My wife cried. She smiled shyly and thanked him. Hearing that her music touched someone deeply gave her a quiet sense of joy. It wasn't pride. It was gratitude. She had shared something real and people had felt it. That meant more than she could put into words. Her students were still talking about the performance. They brought it up during every lesson, asking her how it felt to play in front of everyone. "Were you scared?" one of them asked eagerly. "A little," she admitted, smiling. "But once I started playing, the fear disappeared. It felt like the music carried me." The children looked at her as if she had said something magical. One little girl said softly, "I want to feel like that when I play." "You will," she told her. "It just takes time and heart. When you play from the heart, people will feel it." Those words stayed with her. She realized that her life had changed in ways she never expected. Music was no longer something she did alone in her room. It had become something that connected her to others, to her students, her neighbors, her community. Every note she played was a thread tying her to the world around her. She started to receive small invitations to play at local gatherings. A retirement home asked her to perform one afternoon. Then the nearby school invited her to accompany their choir. Each time she hesitated for a moment, then said yes. And each time she played, she felt more comfortable, more free. The first time she played at the retirement home, she looked out at the audience. Dozens of faces, old and kind, waiting patiently. Some sat in wheelchairs, others leaned on canes. She started with a gentle tune, something soft and familiar. Before long, she saw smiles spreading across the room. One elderly man closed his eyes and began tapping his fingers on his knee, keeping rhythm. When she finished, a woman near the front wiped her eyes and whispered, "That was beautiful." Moments like that reminded her why she played. It wasn't about applause or recognition. It was about touching something deeper in people, a memory, an emotion, a spark of hope. Every performance, no matter how small, became an act of kindness. Her home changed too. The piano, once a quiet piece of furniture, now carried laughter, music, and life. Sometimes her students would come early just to listen to her practice. Other times, she would host tiny recitals where the children performed for their parents. Those evenings were full of warmth, parents clapping proudly, children blushing with happiness, and her smiling quietly from the corner, knowing she had created a space where they could feel brave. One evening, after everyone had gone, she sat at the piano alone. The soft light of the lamp made the room feel peaceful. She thought about how much had happened in the past months. The shy, uncertain woman she used to be felt like someone from another lifetime. She wasn't fearless now, but she was stronger. She had learned that courage didn't mean not being scared. It meant doing something despite the fear. She began to play a melody she hadn't touched in years. It was one her grandmother had loved, slow and tender. As she played, she felt tears fill her eyes. They weren't tears of sadness, they were of gratitude. For the music, for the people who believed in her, for the second chance she had given herself. A few days later, she received a letter in the mail. It was from the town's cultural committee. They wanted to feature her in their upcoming newsletter, a small article about local artists who inspired others. She read the letter twice, smiling to herself. For someone who had once avoided attention at all costs, it felt surreal. But she accepted. If her story could encourage even one person who felt afraid to share their gift, then it was worth it. When the article came out, people congratulated her again. One young man stopped her on the street and said, "I used to play the guitar, but I gave it up years ago. After reading about you, I picked it up again. Thank you," she was touched. That night, she wrote in her journal for the first time in a long while. She wrote about how much she had changed, about how fear had once held her back, and how music had set her free. She ended the entry with one simple line: "When you share what you love, the world becomes softer." As the weeks went by, she continued teaching, performing, and living quietly but joyfully. Her life was not grand or filled with luxury, but it was full of meaning. Each day had purpose. Each lesson, each song, each smile from a child made her heart fuller. One afternoon, while she was preparing tea, she heard a knock at the door. When she opened it, a young woman stood there holding a notebook. She introduced herself as a student from the local college. "I'm studying music education," she said nervously. "I read about you and I was wondering if you'd let me observe your classes for my project. I want to learn how to teach music the way you do." The older woman invited her in with a smile. "Of course," she said warmly. "You're welcome anytime." The two quickly grew close. The young woman was curious, full of energy, and eager to learn. She reminded her teacher of her younger self, shy yet deeply passionate. Over time, the young student began to help with lessons, guiding the children gently, watching, listening. It was a beautiful thing to witness, the passing of knowledge, of love for music from one generation to another. One evening after a lesson, the young woman said, "I can see how much your students love you. It's amazing how you've turned something you once feared into something so beautiful." She smiled softly, Fear can be a teacher too. It shows us where our heart truly is. I learned that hiding doesn't make the fear go away. Only facing it does. Those words stayed with the young woman just as her grandmother's words had once stayed with her, and she knew that her story, her journey from fear to freedom, wasn't just her own anymore. It was part of something larger, something that would continue to ripple through others' lives. Months later, as autumn began to paint the town in shades of gold and orange, she was invited to perform again, this time at the town square during the Harvest Festival. It was a cheerful event filled with laughter, music, and dancing. She played as the sun set, her notes floating through the evening air. Children ran around the stage, couples swayed gently to the rhythm, and the town lights flickered on one by one. When the music ended, she looked up at the sky, the stars beginning to appear. For a long moment she just sat there, breathing in the cool air, feeling completely at peace. Her journey had not been easy, but it had been worth every step. From fear to courage, from silence to song, she had found her way. And as she packed up her sheet music that night, she thought about how strange and beautiful life could be. Sometimes it pushed you into things you didn't want to face, only to show you a side of yourself you never knew existed. Sometimes it made you fall so you could learn to rise stronger. And sometimes it simply waited, patiently, until you were ready to shine. As she walked home, the distant sound of laughter followed her. She smiled to herself. Tomorrow she would teach again. Tomorrow there would be new notes, new mistakes, new laughter. Life would go on quietly, beautifully, and through it all the music would never stop. Winter came slowly that year, wrapping the town in soft gray light and cold winds that whispered through the empty trees. The air smelled of wood smoke and snow, and every window glowed warmly in the evenings. She loved this time of year. It always felt peaceful, like the world had slowed down just enough to listen. Inside her small home, the piano stood waiting by the window, its polished surface reflecting the soft glow of the lamp beside it. Life had settled into a quiet rhythm. Her days were full but gentle, teaching lessons, practicing, sharing tea with neighbors, and sometimes just sitting by the fire with a blanket and her thoughts. The town still spoke about her performances from time to time, but the excitement had faded into something steadier, something real. People didn't see her as a shy woman who surprised everyone anymore. They saw her as part of the heart of the town, someone who gave more than she ever asked for. The children she taught were growing quickly. Their hands were surer on the keys now, their confidence blooming with every song. Some of them had started performing at small gatherings, and she would always sit proudly among the audience, clapping louder than anyone else. It was strange and beautiful to watch them discover the same joy she had once rediscovered for herself. One snowy afternoon, she was giving a lesson when one of her students asked a simple question. "Do you ever get nervous anymore?" The little boy said, his eyes wide with curiosity. She smiled softly, resting her hands on her lap. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but it's different now. Being nervous means I care. It reminds me that the music still matters." The boy seemed to think about that for a while, then nodded. "So it's okay to be scared?" "Of course," she said. "It just means your heart is awake." Later that evening, after her lessons were done, she sat at the piano and began to play a soft melody. The sound filled the quiet house, mingling with the faint crackle of the fire. Her fingers moved without effort, as if the music was coming from somewhere deeper than memory. She closed her eyes, letting the notes drift through her like a warm wind. She thought about how far she had come, from the terrified woman who didn't want to perform, to someone who could now play in front of a crowd without fear. But more than that, she thought about what had changed inside her. It wasn't just confidence. It was peace. She no longer felt the need to prove herself. The music had become her companion, her comfort, her way of speaking when words weren't enough. In the middle of her playing, she felt something stir inside her. A new idea. A quiet whisper. Maybe it was time to do something more, to give back in a bigger way. The thought lingered in her mind long after she stopped playing. The next morning, she went for a walk through town. The snow had covered everything in soft white, and children were laughing as they built snowmen in the park. When she reached the community center, she paused and looked through the window. The same hall where she had first been forced to perform stood there, empty and waiting. She smiled. That place had changed her life. Maybe it could change someone else's too. Over the next few weeks, she began planning something special, a small winter concert not for herself, but for her students. She wanted them to feel the joy of sharing their music the way she had. At first, the children were nervous. "What if we make mistakes?" they asked. She laughed gently. "Then you keep going," she said. "The audience doesn't need perfection. They just need honesty." The preparations filled her days with cheerful energy. Parents helped set up decorations. Neighbors volunteered to bring cookies and tea, and her students practiced harder than ever. The excitement spread quickly through town. People looked forward to it not just for the music, but because it felt like something pure, a reminder of how much beauty could come from courage. On the evening of the concert, the hall glowed with warm lights. Candles flickered along the windowsills, and snowflakes drifted softly outside. The children sat nervously near the stage, their instruments gleaming under the light. She walked among them, offering calm smiles and small words of encouragement. "Just breathe," she told them, "and remember why you love to play." When the first child began to play, the hall grew completely still. The music was simple and sweet, but every note came from the heart. One by one, each student took their turn, filling the room with melodies that spoke of innocence, effort, and joy. The parents watched with shining eyes, their pride glowing brighter than the lights. When it was over, the applause was long and warm. The children looked at each other in amazement, realizing they had done it. They had shared something real. She stood at the side of the stage, her hands clasped together, tears of quiet pride in her eyes. It was one of the most beautiful nights she could remember. After everyone had left and the hall was quiet again, she sat down at the piano, almost out of habit. The candles still flickered softly, and snow continued to fall outside. She let her fingers find the keys and began to play one last song for the night. It was slow and full of gratitude. She wasn't performing now, she was simply saying thank you. Thank you to life, to music, to the journey that had brought her here. As the notes filled the empty hall, she thought about the people who had believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. She thought about her grandmother, about that first terrifying performance, and about all the quiet moments that had led her to this peace. She smiled through her tears, whispering softly, "You were right. Music always finds its way." The next day, the town paper wrote a short piece about the concert, calling it "A Night of Warmth in the Heart of Winter." But she didn't need headlines or praise. Her joy came from seeing her students discover what she had once lost: the beauty of expression, the courage to share, the strength that comes from being vulnerable. In the days that followed, she received many kind letters. One stood out, a note from a young mother who had attended the concert with her little daughter. It read, "My child hasn't stopped talking about the piano since that night. Thank you for inspiring her. Thank you for showing her that music can be a way to speak without words." Reading it, she felt her heart swell. That single letter reminded her that what she did mattered. Even the smallest act of sharing could ripple outward in ways she couldn't imagine. Spring eventually came, melting the last of the snow and filling the air with the scent of blossoms. Her students kept learning, growing bolder with each passing week. The town kept thriving, too, its people connected not by grand gestures but by small, meaningful moments like the ones she had helped create. One sunny afternoon, she sat outside her home with a cup of tea, listening to the sound of a child practicing piano from a nearby house. The notes drifted through the air, hesitant, imperfect, but full of life. She smiled, recognizing the melody. It was the same song she had played at her first performance, and in that moment she realized that her story had come full circle. What began as fear had turned into music, and what began as one woman's courage had become a spark for others. The thought filled her with peace. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of gold, she returned to her piano once more. Her fingers touched the keys gently, as if greeting an old friend. She began to play, not for anyone else but for herself. The melody was soft and full of love. It told the story of a shy woman who found her voice, of music that healed, and of the quiet power that lives in every heart. When the final note faded into silence, she sat for a long time, letting the stillness wrap around her. The journey had been long, but she wouldn't change a single part of it. Through every moment of fear, doubt, and hope, the music had been there, steady, patient, waiting. She smiled, her eyes glistening in the golden light. Life, she thought, was a lot like music. You couldn't always control the tempo or predict the next note, but if you played with honesty, It always found its rhythm, and so she kept playing. Not for applause, not for recognition, but because it was who she was. A quiet woman with a piano and a story that sang softly to anyone willing to listen.